Hey everyone, and welcome back to your daily dose of what's hot on Hacker News. Yesterday was absolutely wild. We combed through 30 stories to bring you the 5 that had everyone talking, debating, and in some cases, completely losing their minds. We've got everything from nostalgic portfolio websites that are dividing the design community to cloud billing horror stories that'll make you want to cancel all your AWS accounts immediately. Plus, we're diving into some surprising hardware secrets in your MacBook, exploring the beautiful intersection of indigenous art and silicon chips, and checking out what happens when a dermatologist decides to vibe code their way into app development. So grab your coffee, settle in, and let's dive into yesterday's top stories from Hacker News. All right, now let's dive into something that absolutely exploded on Hacker News this week. Show HN, I recreated Windows XP as my portfolio. This one pulled in over 900 points and sparked a really fascinating debate about creativity, nostalgia, and what it even means to showcase your skills in 2024. So picture this. You're a hiring manager, you click on someone's portfolio link, and suddenly you're transported back to 2001. The screen goes blue, you see that iconic Windows XP boot sequence, still booting, hang tight, and then boom, there's the rolling Green Hills wallpaper, the chunky blue taskbar, that start button we all clicked a million times. Except instead of Solitaire and Internet Explorer, the desktop icons say things like About Me, my resume, and my projects. This is what graphic designer Mitch Ivan built, and it's honestly kind of brilliant. The whole thing is a fully functional recreation of the Windows XP interface. We're talking the start menu that actually opens, a working taskbar showing 12 p.m., even restart and log off buttons that do exactly what you'd expect them to. Each section of what would normally be a boring portfolio website is transformed into a Windows application window with that classic blue title bar. Now here's where things get interesting and why this sparked such a heated discussion. Mitch was completely transparent that they used AI agents to help with the coding. They're a graphic designer, not a developer. And wow, did that admission open up a can of worms in the comments. You've got one camp saying, hey, this is just copying Microsoft's homework. Where's the actual design skill? And then you've got others arguing that the whole point isn't to show original visual design. It's to demonstrate creativity in presentation, attention to detail, and the persistence to pull off something this technically complex. One commenter, FTRUZZ, made a really solid point. They said, look, the minor inaccuracies people are nitpicking, like the taskbar being slightly the wrong shade of blue or whatever, that's not what matters here. What matters is that this person took a creative risk, executed it well, and created something memorable. How many portfolio sites have you visited that you actually remember a week later? But then you've got the other side raising legitimate questions. If you're hiring a graphic designer, do you want someone who can faithfully recreate existing designs or someone who can create something original? One user pointed out that this is like a chef applying for a job by perfectly recreating someone else's recipe. Technically impressive, sure, but does it tell you if they can actually create their own dishes? The AI angle added another layer to this whole debate. There's this fascinating observation from user Alex about how programmers seem way more chill about AI-generated code than artists are about AI-generated images. And honestly, they might be onto something there. The developer community seems to have mostly accepted AI as just another tool in the toolbox, while the design community is still wrestling with what it means for authenticity and skill demonstration. What really strikes me about this whole thing is what it says about standing out in 2024's job market. We've reached this point where a simple, clean portfolio might not cut through the noise anymore. You need a gimmick, a hook, something that makes people stop scrolling and pay attention. And Windows XP? That's a masterclass in targeted nostalgia. Most hiring managers and senior developers spent years of their lives staring at those green hills. It's comfort food for the tech generation. Some commenters got really nitpicky about the technical details, pointing out that the real Windows XP had different hover states or that the window shadows aren't quite right. And yeah, if you're going for a perfect recreation, those details matter. But I think that misses the forest for the trees here. This isn't about creating a pixel-perfect Windows XP emulator. It's about creating an experience that makes people smile, remember, And most importantly, remember you. The JavaScript requirement is interesting too. The site literally tells you it needs JS for the full Windows XP experience. And that's actually pretty authentic to the era, isn't it? Everything needed plugins and specific browser requirements back then. Though I do wonder how many potential employers might bounce off that requirement in our increasingly security-conscious world. You know what this really reminds me of? Those elaborate marriage proposals that go viral, where someone recreates their partner's favorite movie scene or whatever. Is it over the top? Absolutely. Is it necessary? Probably not. But does it show effort, creativity, and understanding of your audience? 100%. The bigger question this raises is, where does this arms race end? If everyone starts building elaborate, interactive portfolios, does that become the new baseline? Or is this just a flash in the pan, a fun novelty that'll seem dated in a year? Either way, Mitch Ivan is probably getting a ton of attention right now, and in the job market, that's half the battle. Sometimes the best portfolio isn't the most beautiful or the most original. It's the one people can't stop talking about. Speaking of things hidden beneath the surface that people can't stop talking about, let's move from software nostalgia to some hardware secrets that Apple probably didn't want you to know about. Story 2. The MacBook has a sensor that knows the exact angle of the screen hinge. Yeah, you heard that right. Your laptop knows precisely how far open your screen is at any given moment. And with over 600 points and 300 comments, this discovery has really struck a nerve in the tech community. Now, at first glance, you might think, okay, cool party trick, but so what? But this is where things get really interesting and, honestly, a bit controversial. See, this isn't just any sensor. It's actually serialized to the motherboard. That means if it breaks, you can't just swap it out. You need Apple's blessing, their software tools, and probably their repair service to fix it. And that's got a lot of people pretty fired up about the whole right to repair situation. One commenter discovered something pretty wild, though. They're actually using this sensor data to make music. They wrote a little app that translates the lid angle into MIDI notes, so you can literally play your MacBook like an instrument by opening and closing the screen. I mean, that's the kind of creative hacking that makes you love technology, right? But let's talk about why Apple even put this thing in there. The discussion thread is full of theories, and they're all pretty plausible. Some folks think it's for the desk view feature, where your MacBook can use the camera to show what's on your desk during video calls. The sensor would help calibrate that perfectly. Others suggest it's about protecting the device, maybe preventing damage if you close the lid with something on the keyboard, or detecting drops and impacts for warranty claims. What's really interesting is that Apple isn't alone here. Several people pointed out that ThinkPads have had similar sensors for years, and Android foldables obviously need them too. There's even Linux driver support for these sensors on various laptops. So this isn't some crazy Apple-only innovation. But Apple's implementation is, well, very Apple. The serialization thing, though, that's where the conversation gets heated. One commenter put it pretty bluntly. They said Apple is essentially saying, we own your device, you're just renting it. And when you think about it, having a simple angle sensor that could brick your laptop if it fails and isn't replaced through official channels, that does feel a bit excessive, doesn't it? But here's where it gets technically interesting. Some users dug into the actual implementation and found that it's exposed as an HID device. Basically, any app could potentially read this data. One developer even suggested you could probably get an app using this sensor data approved for the App Store. So it's not completely locked down from a software perspective, which is kind of surprising, actually. The repair folks in the thread had some real horror stories. Apparently, these sensors can fail, and when they do, it can prevent the laptop from sleeping properly or cause other weird issues. And because of the serialization, independent repair shops can't just fix it. They literally need Apple's configurator software to pair a new sensor to the motherboard. It's like needing a dealer to replace your car's windshield wipers. You know what really stood out to me in this discussion? The divide between people who see this as clever engineering versus those who see it as hostile design. Some commenters genuinely appreciate the technical capabilities, better power management, enhanced security features, more precise hardware control. but others see every serialized component as another link in the chain that keeps you locked into Apple's ecosystem. And honestly, both sides have a point. The sensor enables some genuinely useful features. That desk view thing, pretty cool. Detecting if your laptop is being opened in a bag, that could save your screen. But did it really need to be serialized? That's the million-dollar question that nobody seems to have a good answer for, except maybe Apple's accounting department. The whole thing really encapsulates the modern Apple experience, doesn't it? Incredible attention to detail, features you didn't know you needed, but also this underlying current of control that makes you wonder who really owns the device you paid for. And judging by those 310 comments, I'm definitely not the only one thinking about this stuff. Transition to story 3. And speaking of wondering who really owns and controls your technology, wait till you hear about the absolute nightmare scenarios playing out in the cloud computing world. All right, so our next story is something that'll probably make your wallet hurt just hearing about it. Serverless Horrors is trending on Hacker News with over 550 points and 400 plus comments. And honestly, it's exactly what it sounds like. This is basically a collection of cloud billing nightmares that'll make you want to hug your old dedicated server and never let go. So here's what's happening. There's this developer named Andres who's building Coolify, which is an open source alternative to platforms like Vercel and Netlify. And he's created this site called serverlesshorrors.com where he's documenting all these absolutely insane stories of people getting hit with massive, unexpected cloud bills. And we're not talking about, oh, I went $50 over budget. We're talking about people waking up to six-figure charges. One of the wildest cases on there, someone had a WebGL games site, right? Got hit with a DOS attack and boom, $100,000 Firebase bill in a single day. Can you imagine checking your email and seeing that? And here's the kicker, it's not even always malicious attacks causing these problems. There's this story about empty AWS S3 buckets, completely empty, racking up $1,300 bills just from unauthorized requests hitting them. You're literally paying for storing nothing because someone's hammering your bucket with requests. But what really gets me about this whole thing is the spending limits issue. Like, multiple people set spending caps thinking they're protected, and then, surprise, the limits don't actually work. There's this one case where someone had a $20 per month Vercel plan, set a $120 spending limit, and still got charged $738. What's even the point of having a spending limit if it doesn't, limit your spending? It's like having a speed governor on your car that just politely suggests you slow down while you blow past it at 120 miles per hour. And the AI angle is fascinating too. We've got Devin AI, which is supposed to be this autonomous coding assistant, making changes that resulted in someone getting a $1,200 post-hog bill. There's another case where Mintlify's AI documentation site generated almost $400 in charges. So now we're at the point where AI tools can autonomously blow up your infrastructure costs. That's a fun new anxiety to have. The Hacker News discussion around this is absolutely going off, and you can really feel the frustration. People are sharing their own horror stories left and right. But what's interesting is there's this whole debate about whether this is a serverless problem or a predatory pricing problem. Some folks are saying, look, the whole serverless model is fundamentally broken because you have no control over costs when someone decides to DDoS you. Others are arguing it's more about these companies deliberately making their pricing models confusing. Like, Cloudflare apparently gave someone 24 hours to pay $120,000 or lose their service. That's not a billing dispute. That's a hostage situation. There's actually some pushback in the comments, though. One user points out that AWS does have a free tier with actual working spending limits that will prevent charges, which kind of contradicts the whole narrative. And several people mention that companies like Vercel often waive these charges when you contact them. But then that raises the question, if they're so willing to waive them, why are they charging them in the first place? Is this just a business model where you charge everyone massive bills and then forgive the ones who complain loudly enough? What's really striking is how many developers in the comments are just straight up advocating for going back to traditional hosting. People are raving about Hetzner, talking about getting dedicated servers for like €40 a month that would cost thousands on AWS. One commenter put it perfectly. They said, with a VPS, the worst case scenario is your server goes down. But with serverless, the worst case is bankruptcy. And honestly, the more I think about this, the more it feels like we've created this incredibly complex abstraction layer that's supposed to make things easier. But instead, it's created this whole new category of financial risk. Like, remember when the biggest hosting worry was whether your site could handle traffic? Now, it's whether handling that traffic will literally bankrupt you. There's something deeply wrong when developers are more afraid of success than failure, because success might trigger a $100,000 cloud bill. The whole serverless naming thing is getting roasted in the comments too, and rightfully so. People are calling it Orwellian because, of course, there are servers. They're just someone else's servers that you have zero control over, but somehow unlimited financial liability for. It's like calling something driverless when there's still a driver, you just can't see them, and they might randomly decide to drive you off a cliff. This really feels like a reckoning moment for the whole cloud pricing model. When you've got developers creating entire websites just to document billing horror stories, maybe it's time to admit the system's broken. Now, let's shift from the cutting edge of cloud computing disasters to something that beautifully bridges the ancient and the modern, a story about how traditional art forms are finding new life in representing our digital world. All right, switching gears completely here. Our next story is about a Navajo weaving of an integrated circuit, the 555 timer. And honestly, this might be one of the most fascinating cultural crossovers I've seen in tech recently. This really caught fire on Hacker News with over 350 points and some genuinely thoughtful discussion. So here's what happened. DNA weaver Marilu Schultz created this incredible traditional Navajo weaving that depicts the actual internal circuitry of a 555 timer chip. And think about that for a second. She took the microscopic architecture of a silicon chip and transformed it into a human-scale textile artwork using traditional indigenous weaving techniques that go back centuries. The 555 timer, for those who might not know, is this legendary little chip that was once the world's best-selling integrated circuit. We're talking billions sold. These things are everywhere. Sound generators, LED flashers, windshield wiper controllers, you name it. It's like the duct tape of the electronics world. Simple, reliable, and surprisingly versatile. What Schultz did is she accurately represented the chip's metallic wiring as white lines against a black background, the black representing the silicon substrate. The reddish-orange diamonds in the weaving, those are the bond pad connections where the tiny wires, thinner than human hair, would connect to the chip's external pins. She even got the transistors right, showing the 3 large ones as filled squares with this specific Wong pattern and the smaller transistors as dots. All 25 transistors accurately placed. The community response to this has been amazing, and it's opened up this whole conversation about the hidden connections between Native American communities and the tech industry. Turns out there's this rich history here that most people don't know about. Commenters were sharing stories about Navajo women who literally wove computer circuits for the Apollo moon landing program. There was a Fairchild semiconductor plant built on Navajo land back in the day. During World War II, Navajo code talkers weren't just using their language for secure communications. They were part of the foundation of modern cryptography and communications technology. One commenter mentioned visiting the National Museum of the American Indian and seeing similar work. Apparently, there's been this ongoing artistic exploration of technology through traditional Native American art forms. Someone else brought up this artist, Guillermo Bert, who's been encoding QR codes into Chilean textiles, creating these pieces that bridge ancient and digital storytelling methods. Now, there was one interesting contrarian take in the discussion. Someone questioned why we're still so focused on the 555 timer when modern microcontrollers can do everything it does and more. They suggested maybe this fascination is more about nostalgia than practical relevance. But I think they're missing the point entirely. The 555 timer is elegant in its simplicity. It's a perfect teaching tool, a design classic. It's like asking why we still study Shakespeare when we have Netflix, you know? What really strikes me about this piece is how it makes the invisible visible. We live surrounded by integrated circuits, but how many of us have actually seen what's inside them? Schultz's weaving takes something that requires an electron microscope to properly examine and scales it up to something you could hang on your wall. And in doing so, she's revealing the hidden beauty in these functional designs. There's also this fascinating discussion in the comments about whether you could actually make this functional. Like, what if you used conductive thread? Could you create a working circuit in textile form? Someone mentioned the MIT Media Lab has actually done projects along these lines, creating electronic textiles that aren't just representations, but actual functioning circuits. The more I think about this, the more layers I see. It's a piece about translation, between scales, between cultures, between different ways of understanding and representing the world. It's taking the language of Silicon Valley and expressing it through an artistic tradition that predates the United States itself. And in that translation, something new emerges, this beautiful hybrid that honors both traditions while creating something entirely unique. You know what really gets me? This isn't just art about technology or technology as art. It's a reminder that all human knowledge systems, whether they're expressed in silicon or wool, in binary code or geometric patterns, they're all trying to capture and communicate truth about the world. And sometimes the most profound insights come from the unexpected connections between them. And speaking of unexpected connections and non-traditional approaches to technology, our final story today perfectly captures this moment we're living in, where AI is enabling people with deep domain expertise, but no coding background, to suddenly become app developers. All right, so here's something that really caught my eye on Hacker News today. Show HN. I'm a dermatologist, and I vibe coded a skin cancer learning app. Now, if you're like me, you probably did a double take on vibe coded, and yeah, we're gonna dig into what that means because it's actually pretty fascinating. So this dermatologist built an app called Mole Check. And get this, they basically created it by feel, using AI assistance without being a traditional programmer. They literally describe it as vibe coding, just kind of following their instincts and letting AI tools help them build something functional. And you know what? The community is absolutely eating this up. We're talking 353 points and over 200 comments, with people getting really excited about what this represents for the future of software development. The app itself is actually pretty clever. Imagine Tinder, but instead of swiping on potential baits, you're swiping on pictures of skin lesions. Swipe left if you think it looks concerning, swipe right if it seems fine. It's kind of genius in its simplicity, right? Taking this interface that millions of people already understand and using it to teach something potentially life-saving. But here's where it gets really interesting. The discussion in the comments is split between two camps. On one side, you've got people who are absolutely thrilled about this. They're comparing it to the spreadsheet revolution of the 80s, saying this is the moment where domain experts, people who actually know their field inside and out, can finally build the tools they need without waiting for a software developer to have time in their schedule. One commenter made this brilliant point that we're seeing AI democratize software development the same way spreadsheets democratized data analysis. And honestly, I think they're onto something here. Think about how many brilliant ideas die because the person with the domain knowledge can't code, and the person who can code doesn't have the domain knowledge. This dermatologist just bypassed that whole problem. Now, the other camp, they're raising some pretty valid concerns. There's this commenter, Lazarus01, who basically called it, "Am I hot or not for skin cancer?" And okay, that's harsh, but they have a point about the limitations. Several users tried the app and found they were scoring below random chance. One person mentioned that basal cell carcinomas just looked like everyday blemishes to them, and they couldn't tell the difference at all. There's also this fascinating discussion about the base rate fallacy happening here. The app apparently shows a much higher proportion of cancerous lesions than you'd see in real life, which makes sense for training purposes, but it could seriously mess with people's anxiety levels. Imagine if every third mole you see in the app is cancerous, but in reality, it's more like 1 in thousands. You'd start freaking out about every little spot on your body. What really strikes me, though, is the bigger picture here. We're watching someone who spent years in medical school, who knows skin cancer inside and out, who can just make an app now. No computer science degree required. They had an idea on a Friday afternoon, and by Monday, they had something people could use. Sure, it's not perfect. The developer themselves admits the desktop experience isn't great, and you really should use it on mobile, but it exists, and it's teaching people something important. The term vibe coding itself is becoming a whole thing in the comments. People are debating whether this is the future or just a trendy term for hacking something together with AI help. But you know what? I don't think it matters what we call it. What matters is that barriers are falling. And look, I get the concerns about medical accuracy and liability. This isn't a diagnostic tool, it's educational. But even so, when you're dealing with health information, there's always that question of responsibility. What if someone relies on this app and misses something serious? Or what if they become paranoid and start going to the dermatologist every week? But here's the thing. The developer is a dermatologist. They're not some random person who watched a YouTube video about skin cancer. They have the expertise to know what's important to teach, even if they don't have the traditional programming skills to build complex software. And maybe that's exactly what we need more of. Domain experts who can quickly prototype and share their knowledge, even if the implementation isn't perfect. The community seems to think this is just the beginning. Several commenters are predicting we'll see an explosion of these kinds of apps. Lawyers building legal education tools, mechanics creating diagnostic apps, teachers making custom learning experiences, all without needing to learn Python or JavaScript or whatever the cool kids are using these days. It's messy, it's imperfect, and it's absolutely fascinating to watch unfold. This might be one of those moments we look back on as a turning point, when specialized knowledge met accessible AI tools and something new emerged. Or maybe it's just a fun experiment that'll inspire better, more rigorous approaches down the line. Either way, I'm here for it.